Hey everybody, this is Kathleen Moss, and you're listening to A Breast Cancer Diary. My guest today is Anna Hopkins, my good friend from the flat community. Anna and I met a year ago in October at the Palm Springs Flat Retreat, and we've been connecting ever since, both on the topic of flat and on the topic of lobular advocacy. Anna is a retired dental hygienist. She lives in Tucson, Arizona, and she was diagnosed in 2008 with ER-positive stage 2 invasive lobular carcinoma, which we haven't talked about too much on the podcast yet, but it's a big passion of mine. Her initial lumpectomy in 2008 was followed pretty quickly after by a double mastectomy in 2009. And then she went flat a whole 10 years later in 2019. She goes by the Closet Lady in her videos on both YouTube and Instagram. And so we'll talk a little bit about her work as an advocate for flat fashion. And Anna, I just want to welcome you to the podcast. We've been planning this for so long. Thank you for coming on and telling your story today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Kathleen. I so appreciate being able to be here and share a little bit of my journey.
Yeah. So I want to talk about some of your initial diagnosis details and decisions. You happened to have a lumpectomy first, and then you had a real big change of heart quickly after that. And I wanted to hear about that first.
Okay, yes. So I happened to be watching a show, and they were talking because it was Breast Cancer Awareness Month in October. And I thought, oh, I should, do a self-exam, and I did. And I was quite surprised when I actually found what felt like a pretty good-sized lump to me. Um, and I was somebody that had already had implants in my body. So it was not always easy to do self exams because of those. And they were saline implants at the time. And I had had them, I want to say, for probably about 8 years at that time. So I found the lump and went in to have it looked at. They couldn't find it. The radiologist technician could not find it on ultrasound. And I kept telling them that there was indeed something there. They eventually brought in the actual radiologist who had to do the ultrasound themselves, and they did verify, yes, that there was indeed something there, and opted, instead of having like a needle biopsy. I had begun my research immediately and understood there was like false positives and negatives with needle biopsies, and that either way the lump needed to come out. So I just went immediately to the surgical route and said, please remove the lump. And so they removed the lump, and that's when the diagnosis came back, really relatively within 2 days, that it was indeed positive for breast cancer. And lobular breast cancer is what they told me when I went into the office, and then things kind of become a whirlwind really quickly. So, and they also, I'll never forget this statement, that one of the things they said, oh, it's a great thing that you had implants in your body because it helped push the lump forward so you were able to palpate it and feel it. So I was kind of immediately like, because I kind of felt benign about implants before, like it was no big deal. I had nursed my children, and my breast, I felt, less than as a woman, and I had wanted, to make them look better again. So that's why I got the implants. So I was thinking, oh, these things are wonderful. It even helped me discover my own breast cancer, at the time. I also came into that at the same time having a long history of allergies that seemed to be continuously building and more problems. So I did have a great oncologist, I will say. He did tell me, because of my allergies and things that I had at the time, that he wanted to kind of confer with, basically he was on a board, and he wanted to talk to the board that was kind of had, doctors from all over the states. And he wanted to sit down with them because of my long history of allergies and rare kind of conditions already. He also told me at the time, he said, I'm kind of concerned that possibly the chemotherapy would be the thing to kill you before the cancer even. So that kind of stuck with me. There were just some, statements that kind of stuck with me. And then I was also, avidly, I remember not sleeping and being up all hours and trying so hard to find books and, all the information I could, which was really difficult to find back in 2008. And, as you know, probably, I mean, social media groups were in their infancy, and I didn't belong to any at the time. And so, and just research online was not as perfected as it is now, and just not the amount of information available. Not that it's always accurate, but it was harder to kind of weed through and find anything anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, it was pretty adamant that it usually will mirror image in the other breast, if you have your lobular, that kind of thing. So I was like, okay, which was a really strong point for me to advocate for a mastectomy on both sides. Even though I was being told by my team, let's just do the lumpectomy, and if anything, you could take the one breast off. And then my oncologist at the time, though I will give him this credit again, said, there's really only a 2% benefit if you're going to do this chemotherapy, and you need to weigh if that's going to be beneficial enough for you. He seemed to be a little more on the cutting edge kind of information about lobular, where he told me that the benefits weren't great, and also given my allergies. And he said, and he literally looked me in the face, which I still to this day feel so grateful for. And he said, I have to tell you that the protocol is that you need to do chemotherapy. He said, but I want you to know that I'm not going to lose any sleep if you choose not to.
Hmm.
And it was kind of like giving me permission to do what I felt was already the best thing. And it also kind of not only empowered me, but solidified the information I had found.
And your tumor was, you said, 2 centimeters. So it wasn't a tiny tumor. It was definitely palpable. So that's interesting.
Yeah, it was 2.5 centimeters. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
your impression is that it was because it was lobular, and lobular doesn't respond as well to chemo. That is the reason why your oncologist said that.
Yes, and there was very little information about that back then, but there was something because like I said, I had really gone down some holes and, finding it's just what I do. So, I found everything I possibly could, and I'm grateful that I was able to find something on that.
Sure. So you decided on a double mastectomy against their wishes. They were trying to encourage you to, at most, do a single mastectomy. How did you land on the double mastectomy decision?
I did not want to approach fearful of a mammogram every year, and is it back, and then I've got to go through this whole procedure again. To me, it just made more sense to take them both off. I mean, it to me felt like a risk that I just wasn't willing to live with. It didn't feel peaceful to my sense of what thriving would feel like. Yeah.
Yeah. And so did you get implants at that time when you had the double mastectomy?
Yes, and I really have to say this is a part that I really felt a lot of shame in because, feeling so, interested in, research and really wanting answers and knowing how important health is, with the way we feed our body and all those other things. I felt really shameful that I somehow missed the component of implants and the toxicities that might have existed within them. And then I also try to remember to be kind to myself, that remember I was given these messages that, hey, it saved my life. It helped me find the breast cancer. And so I, had a friend who was actually a plastic surgeon of all things, and his mother had gone through breast cancer. And he himself assured me how safe these were now because they'd been so extensively researched and they'd just been re-released. And I should feel so good about having them in my body now. And he showed me, how he could cut them in half and they no longer would ooze everywhere in your body. He went through the whole thing, and this was even a friend of mine, and I was being told this. So I really bought it hook, line, and sinker and didn't think further through it. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you had some shame after that, after you had received the implants. How long did it take you to learn about breast cancer illness and the toxicity?
My gosh, for years. So, in my to get the implants, the reconstruction of my body, you remember I had implants prior, and I think I was accumulating issues. My allergies were increasing, all these things. And then they of course put the silicone implants in my body because they're like, you have just skin left, there's no fat, these aren't going to be as ripply, it's going to be better overall. So they put, the expanders in my body. My body rejected these expanders. Initially, they told me they would be in my body for maybe 3 months, and they constantly were, putting more fluid because I had all this extra skin to fill up where, my breast had been before. And the skin kept dying and blackening. I kept having infections. They kept, swabbing them. They couldn't figure out what the infections were. I mean, I was miserable. And yet they pumped it fluid all the time with all that going on. And then they would do surgery and cut out the dead tissue and continue on and sew me up. And it became so tight with the expanders. And they kept assuring me that, oh, it'll be better when we get them out. And, we'll put the implants in and all will be well. I had that for 9 months before they put the implants in my body, when my body healed enough, though they did at the time say there's no more skin left to take now. We'll have to take it from your back if it doesn't close this time so that we can reconstruct still. I remember being terrified thinking, I don't want that latissimus dorsi surgery, the whole thing. And for whatever reason, my body closed that last time. They took the implant, the expanders out, put in the implants. And, subsequently, you can imagine I started the journey with, of course, hearing from, my oncologist and, the people that tell me, oh, they look great. This is a wonderful result, and I'm thinking I look disfigured and horrendous, but they kept, I looked great in clothes, and that seemed to be all that mattered to everybody. And that I was, looking like a normal woman. And, also newly married, for a year, I felt the pressure of like, I needed to make sure I had breasts for my husband. There was a lot to it.
Sure.
And I continued for 10 years with incredible pain. And I would always go in and say, they're so tight, they're uncomfortable. And they would always assure me, oh, it's fine. You're going to, you're aging, you're going to have other issues. It's not the implants, they're safe. I kept, at some one point within the last couple of years, I kept saying, it doesn't feel right. Like, I feel like something's wrong. And, once I decided on the explant, finally, at the 10-year mark, I was like, and I knew, they're only supposed to be good for 10 years. They kept assuring me, oh, they can stay forever, even though the data said otherwise. And I said, I had to then, of course, go through the battle of, I want these out of my body and I want them out at all costs. I didn't know anything about flat closure. There was no information that I had found about it other than that people that were dying and had no option to live were kind of, flat because they were, had given little time left on earth. And I said, I don't care if I'm disfigured. Please get these out of my body. I knew that I was ill and I was very ill and it did not match my lifestyle. Like, there's no reason I should feel the way I did and have the issues I had when I lived the way I did. I mean, a lot of people might think it rigid, but I'm not someone who is wavers and cheats or, my lifestyle was so clean and so healthy. So I knew that that was the last thing and I wanted them out. So I didn't know about breast implant illness still even at that point.
Okay.
Yeah. But I did find a surgeon that told me about it.
So you were probably really shocked after the explant, then, after you took your implants out, how well you started to feel, I imagine.
It was immediate. I had no expectation. I did not know. Of course, I'm still thinking, will this make me better? I don't know. Immediately, my range of motion was incredibly improved, and I was still recovering under anesthesia and, wounds and things. I could already feel a difference. People would see me and they would say, what? I mean, your eyes, like, I didn't realize how the physical toll it had taken on my body. They would say, have you lost weight? I mean, it looked like I lost 30 pounds. I was swollen from the inflammation in my body from those implants. And the surgeon at the time who ended up operating on me was wonderful, microsurgeon. And he did tell me about breast implant illness. And he said, I do believe that you have this. So yeah, it was miraculous how much better I felt. It was miraculous. I felt like a whole new human being. Even though I still had some chronic issues, I kind of felt like I was going back to the me before I ever had implants on my body. And it was just so amazing.
So I want to hear about your experience with flat closure, not just the surgery and the outcome and how
Mhm.
it looked, but how you felt going into it and then how you felt later coming out of it.
Okay, I felt going into it, I was scared. I didn't know anybody else that was flat. I didn't have any pictures. Um, I didn't have any information. I just knew it was what I needed, and I expected to come out disfigured, and that I was just going to be okay with that. Part of that journey that really stood out for me was I was referred to my general practitioner when I was trying to find a plastic surgeon that would remove them because my oncologist office, didn't want me to do it, and nor the breast surgeon that had initially operated on me. So they referred me to my general practitioner, where I just went in for, I don't even know what I was going in for, just a checkup. And they gave me a psychological evaluation, which I was completely shocked and astounded and did not even realize what was happening until they left the room. And I didn't have a voice to even ask them or question them. I just walked out of the office stunned, honestly.
Mm.
And then I found, a space of anger, thinking, what is going on? But it did not deter me from my determination to get them out of my body. So it's kind of like that, advocacy for myself kicked in again, where I knew what was better for me and I was really going to stick with it. Kind of like when I was first diagnosed, but I had missed this component. So found the right surgeon through a couple referrals and talked to him at length about wanting them out of my body. He did kind of considered if I had enough fat, to kind of do the deep flap and all that stuff. he said, you do not have enough fat to do that. And it would only give you at best a size A. I said, listen, I don't want that. It's not worth it for me at all. I don't want that surgery. I'm willing, whatever it takes to be disfigured. And so he just agreed he would do the best he could. And we left it at that. I also, for me, what was the most difficult thing for me and part of my journey was the crying of losing my breasts when I went through it initially, because I nursed my children with them. And to me, it was a really hard letting go of something that was so important to me that nurtured my children. I was driving in my convertible car of all things, and the rain started pouring down. And it was like, kind of like, the universe speaking to me and allowing me to grieve it fully. My nipples hardened at the time because it was chilly and it was rainy. And I started bawling even harder because I thought, I'll never know what this experience is like again, to feel, something that's so natural. We don't even think about it, about our nipples hardening for whatever reason. It was just really a huge grief process. And I still feel teary when I talk about it because it was powerful, how important breasts are to our, definition of ourselves sometimes as women for many reasons. So yeah, that was a big experience. When I awoke, you know, it was astounding to me when I saw, my scars for the first time. I still have pictures of when I first saw them and the drains coming out of my body. And it was hard. I mean, I had been so defined by my breast as a woman, not only was it something that, people considered me so, voluptuous and beautiful with, but leaving after having a flat closure and seeing my scars for the first time, I kind of remember feeling this surprising sense of like acceptance that I didn't expect to have. And again, I hadn't found the flat communities or anything like that. And I remember feeling powerful because my daughter was seeing me as a powerful woman still with no breast. And she's a young adult woman at this time. And she had lived with me through breast cancer, and it was very traumatic for her. And now, as a young woman, to see me make this other decision and to feel powerful as a woman still. And I felt like this power of this little girl that I once was, who was never defined by breast or anything. When you're a little girl, you're just a little girl, you're just Anna. And I felt like just Anna again. I can't really put words to it still. It was so powerful. And it kind of is what carried me through the challenges of like the healing, the lumps and bumps, the redness, the things that you deal with, the taking of the drains out, all the things that are hard, like how do I dress? All those things. So yeah, it was super powerful. And yeah, then I remember thinking, gosh, maybe I should go in and see what it's like to have a prosthetic. And I remember spending a few hours. The women were lovely. They showed me all these different shapes and sizes and all these things. And I thought, when I remember putting them on, I remember thinking, gosh, these feel so weird and awkward. And I feel like they didn't feel heavy, but I was like, everybody's going to know these aren't real breasts. It's interesting how your mind does these things. And I wanted nothing to do with them, but I still took them home thinking, how could I ever feel comfortable in these? What if they fall out? What if they move? Like, it was such a weird thing for me. And I also didn't feel comfortable walking around flat at the time. So I was really kind of, at home and healing and trying to find my place in the world now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I first encountered your body 4 years after you went
Mhm.
flat.
Yeah.
And I remember my first thoughts. So I was there when you first took your shirt off in public for the first time at the breast cancer walk in Palm Springs last year. I was standing right next to you. I don't know if you remember that, but
I
it was
don't. It was
really,
like a blur.
yeah, it was an emotional moment. And I remember thinking how beautiful your body was. It was very well healed because, it had been that many years. Um, but you didn't have any dog ears. You didn't have any ripples. Your chest was really beautifully done, I thought. Did you have the same feeling once you did experience all the photos on Instagram and compared yourself with other women? Did you have some pride in the outcome that you had received? Or did you have other surgeries to make it look more flat?
Yeah, no, I feel like I was so fortunate somehow in finding the surgeon that I did, and that he kind of underpromised and over-delivered. And I was surprised when I began seeing others like myself, which was so healing too. It was such a big part of my healing journey. And I didn't feel critical of what they had, and I didn't feel pity, but I started seeing, because I think it was before there was like legislation and kind of, things to really kind of, protect us and to give us options that we deserve, as women, to have our body look a certain way instead of just being at the mercy of whatever the physician could do or thought was best. So I did feel, wow, I really am fortunate, that my body healed so well. And then I was fortunate with all the damage that had been done to my chest that he still was able to repair me the way he did. And I do feel, yeah, that I'm very lucky and fortunate to have the outcome that I've had. Yeah, because I can imagine going through this, the journey myself, how much, more of a challenge that presents when you're left with all this extra skin and you're like wondering why, like why does it look like this? Did it have to be this way? Like, yeah. So I think it's really, yeah, a lucky thing for me, honestly. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to hear about the transition from that moment when you went flat to
Mhm.
becoming who you are now, which is kind of an advocate in the public eye, like really, really advocating for not just flatness, but a feminine brand of flatness. So we're not just seeing you on your videos talking about accepting your new body, but you are flaunting your new body in a very fashion forward, feminine way, which is not something we see in the flat community a whole lot. So, where did you get that energy for this new kind of advocacy and body positivity?
Yeah, gosh, I wish I knew. I feel like it has been such an evolution for me. Like when I started this journey, I could never have imagined this being the place that I would land. So, yeah, it's been so interesting to just kind of watch. I feel like I've grown so much on this journey, and I really, again, being a painfully shy person, and initially when I first started taking pictures, there's some people that stand out for me in the community that kind of gave me a lift and empowerment, and to try to maybe be flat for the day, or to try things on. And I love that we could share fashion and like, how do you wear something and what do you feel good in? And I started, like, I had never even taken a selfie prior to this ever. Like, I was not that person, and I was never in pictures because I was always taking pictures of everyone in my family. So it was, I didn't consider myself photogenic. People say, "Oh, you take awful pictures." So it was really like a thing for me to like do this. And I would do it in my closet, which is, I've always loved clothes and I've always loved fashion, but I never thought I was particularly good at it. I always thought I was just kind of weird and I liked all kinds of strange things. And, kind of was like a way to like embody maybe a character because I'm shy. And so I could feel like powerful in that moment of like, oh, well, I'm this today, even if I feel quiet and shy. This is a way for me to speak without,
Mhm.
and I feel powerful in it in a way. And plus I'm artistic, so I think there's a piece with that. So yeah, kind of like having a space where I already had a lot of clothing and accessories and things, and going through the transition of like, should I just get rid of everything, or do I so I started that thinking I need to get rid of everything. Then I kind of stopped and I slowed down, and I during my healing and kept everything. And then I started trying things on when I was seeing other people online, and I would learn to take a picture of myself with the help of other people in my closet. And so one of the flatties started calling me, "Oh, look, it's Closet Lady again," because I was in my closet taking my picture. I didn't want it to be, about me. Nobody needs to look like me or to have my same journey or any of that. But I wanted people to realize, like, gosh, clothes can really be powerful. Like, you can feel good in anything you wear, or you can feel awful, and it kind of can enhance how you're already feeling in the day. So I kind of just, went through that journey myself and realized how powerful my clothing was for me, and how I discovered that, gosh, I hated ruffles before, and wow, I really like ruffles now, especially in the beginning because I was still really struggling. Like, gosh, I feel like, even though people will say I have a really nice closure, I still have like lumps and dips in my mind. And I didn't feel so great when my t-shirt was really tight initially, and I like wanted to feel a little better. And so I would wear something with ruffles, and I was like surprised. I was like, wow, like, I really like the way I look and feel in this. I can do this. And it just kind of, again, continued to snowball from there. And I kind of discovered like a whole new sense of style for myself too, with things I never had worn before. And it no longer was about like appealing to like the male gaze. It was appealing to my inner sense of who I am.
Yeah.
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 And I noticed that who you are and what you need changes from day to day. And I love that you give us permission to wear prosthetics when we're feeling the need to, not be flat visible or flat advocates in a visible way. But you also seem to have a lot of joy. And maybe, I don't know if this is true, but I notice that more and more as the months and years go by, you have a lot of joy and pride in your flatness and your natural body shape now. Is that true, or am I just making that up?
It's so true. Yeah, I really have like embraced my body and I actually love being flat more now than I ever did because I journeyed through wearing prosthetics more, at the time, but I also always feel like it's such an important message because I lived that journey to never like diminish or discriminate within our own community because I don't think there's a right way to do flat. And I think there are opportunities to really be visible that are so important and if you can participate in that, gosh, that's powerful. But I think everybody's ready in their own time, and some may never be ready. But I want people to know there's lots of options out there. So, I want to share with you what I've discovered and which ones I liked and why. But I really do. I love my body now, and I am so amazed at its healing capacity. I am so grateful that I'm alive. I'm grateful that I can share, what my flat closure looks like. If it's going to help just one other woman or person make that, experience easier or help them on their discovery of what choice is best for them. It's a good feeling to walk around flat and to own it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, really just own it and know that I have never felt more feminine and more womanly. And I know that must be so hard to like imagine. And I don't want people to have to lose their breast to discover that. But I am telling you, that is my experience. Like, wow, I've never felt more woman in my life without breasts than I did, far more than I did with breasts.
I want to hear more about that. What do you think that is rooted in? Do you feel like there is something about your breasts that were traumatic for you or associated with trauma? Or
I do. I do feel like breasts can really be traumatizing for us women because I think, societally and, without, blaming any one particular component of society, I do think the message is that, the shape of your breast, the size of your breast, define how sexual you are and how sexually appealing you are and how fertile you are. And, all the things that seem to be what define whether a woman has value in our society when she's young, and then as she ages, and how perky can she keep them and all these, these horrible messages that we get. And it's like what gets lost in translation is like, who are we as human beings, right? And what is our purpose here? And how much we have to offer in our wisdom along the journey. I feel like it's almost like you go through all these hard things and like it's like the pinnacle if you're lucky enough to get to live to old age and have that moment where all those things you've gone through give you've like reached that moment of like, wow, like this is really where I wanted to be all along, to embrace, the beauty of actually being a woman has nothing to do with breasts
Mhm.
at all. Yeah, and I think they're traumatizing and I think, gosh, we are so much more than our body parts and it's so sad to me that that gets lost. And I really, I hope that somehow in my mission of empowering people with clothing and stuff that I get to like help young girls or whoever realize that, wow, you are not the way you dress because you can change that every day from moment to moment and your breasts do not define you. You are so much more than that.
Thank you. That's such an important message. I really value that and I relate to that. I want to ask you about the place where you live because I visited you there. Last time I saw you, we were both in Tucson. We were at a retreat and then we went out to dinner and talked about lobular advocacy. And I notice when I'm in Arizona, it's definitely a more conservative state than where I live here on the West Coast. But it's also a little more like a feminista kind of place. Like if you're a woman, you're expected to dress like a woman. You're expected to spend money on your clothes and look a certain way, which is kind of fun in some ways. Like for those of us who've grown up in a super casual environment, it's kind of fun to dress up. And I enjoyed that part of my visit. But how do you feel people respond to you when they do notice your flatness in public where you live? Do you feel like there's an acceptance, or do you feel like you're really challenging the societal norms or the social norms?
I definitely feel like I'm challenging the societal norms in my community where I live. I think I'm never, I don't see, even though it's not a huge city, it's a big enough city. I don't see anybody else walking around flat. I don't, I don't have people approaching me and saying anything ever, asking me questions. I do have people that look at me, and it's not like a look of, where I'm feeling accepted. I think there's a lot of questioning that goes into it. I think you're so right about, community and acceptance, and, whether it's, more liberal or conservative, areas that you live in really does. And it is challenging, but it also kind of makes me more determined to, kind of challenge that, because I think it's super important to be seen that, as a woman, women don't need to look a certain way, right? To be a woman and to be embraced as such, or however they want to define themselves. Yeah, so it's challenging for sure in my community. I wish, yeah, it were different, but I think I always consider each of us like, like the drop of water that, the gazillions that it takes to make up the ocean. I think each one of us, we think that we can't make a difference, but I think without each little drop, it never is going to make a difference. So I'm just one of the drops, and I'm sure there'll be more. And hopefully, that change, you always want to embody, in my opinion, the change you want to see in the world. So that's what I'm trying to do. Yeah.
And I know you have a local flat group, Arizona Flatties, that you're a big part of. Has that made you guys as flatties a little more tight or bonded, do you think? Or how does that change the dynamic of your flat group locally?
Gosh, I always feel, yeah, I definitely feel an automatic tightness and bondness whenever I'm around other flatties. It's just such an unspoken, amazing connection. I think that is so important and healing always, no matter where you are in the journey. It's always so reinforcing. But I wish we all lived closer. I think, living out in Arizona, things are quite spread out. So, getting together is a challenge and doesn't happen as often as I would like by any means. But yeah, the times we do meet up, it's always a beautiful, experience. Yeah, it's like hard to put words to.
There's one other part of your story that I wanted to touch on today. There's so many things we could touch on, but one part of your story that I really relate to is the decision not to do chemo. For me, I wasn't really pushed to do it. Nobody even asked me to do it. But um, the result of that is feeling a little bit different within the breast cancer community at large. As flatties, we feel different because we don't have the implants. But as somebody who didn't do chemo or radiation, you can also feel like a little bit of an imposter syndrome, and you've spoken to that before. Would you be willing to talk a little bit about what that experience has been like for you?
Sure. And I think I always am really careful, and I haven't had this conversation much because I don't want to ever convey that my choices are something that should be, across the board for everybody, or that I'm against, you know, current, advanced medical treatments or, protocols, because there's so much benefit to them often. But yeah, when I chose to not do the chemotherapy, I really, when you're going through all that stuff and there's so much being thrown at you, one of the things often they'll like, then there's this cancer group and you should go here and you should do this. And I remember going to a couple of those meetings initially when I was going through surgeries and things, and I didn't feel like I could fit in because my story wasn't something I could tell or talk about or that anybody could relate to. And I do remember someone actually outward telling me, like, you're going to die, like, because I didn't choose
Oh,
chemotherapy.
wow.
And it was really scary to me because I didn't have anybody else to say, but look at them, they lived, right? And they chose this too. So it was really isolating and really a challenge to really stick to what feels true to you. And I think that's where, community and support is so important, because, it is so important to be embraced and to feel okay about your choices too. So yeah, it was really, really challenging. And it still is, honestly, all these years later. I know very few people that have, chosen to not do chemotherapy. And maybe there's more and they're just not willing to talk about it either. And I can completely understand why, because I think often, there's a thing with that, like that as somehow that I'm trying to get a message across that it's not safe to do chemotherapy or it's the wrong thing to do. And that is not my message on any level. But it is also a choice to not do chemotherapy, you know, and yeah, it would be great if there was, yeah, more support
Yeah.
surrounding that. Yeah.
It's very polarizing. We hear about Elle Macpherson in the news right now and how she's trying to be transparent about her process and getting a lot of abuse for it. There's so much fear around cancer, and legitimately, I mean, I just lost my mom very suddenly from metastatic breast cancer, so can't be light about it. But it is true that more and more, and my podcast is definitely showing this. These days, a lot of doctors are not jumping right into chemo for every patient. There are certain patients that don't get chemo these days, where maybe back in the time of your diagnosis, it was more normative for every single patient to get chemo. Certainly with lobular breast cancer, we're seeing more and more data showing that chemo is not as effective. And that's scary because you have less tools in your arsenal. We don't want that. But at the same time, I think there needs to be a space and an acceptance for those who both chose not to do chemo and who were not even asked to do chemo. And a place for us to say that we still have other experiences that are similar to the breast cancer community in terms of fear of recurrence. I mean, that's the thing that we all share that is probably the most intense and the most fear producing. That is something that unites all of us, regardless of what our bodies look like or whether we went through a certain treatment that most women go through when they have breast cancer. So I just want to reiterate that. I'll probably talk more about that in my next episode, reflecting on our conversation here as well. But I just want to affirm you as a legitimate member of our community in recovery from breast cancer, even though you didn't do chemo, and that probably was more isolating and scary for you not to do chemo than it is for those of us who are not even asked to do it. So I honor your choice. I understand. It's really interesting that you associate the allergies and the sensitivities that your body had at the time of your diagnosis. Now, I think I'm hearing that you're associating it with your implants that you had prior to being diagnosed, which is really interesting because we think of breast implant illness as an autoimmune disorder, and it sounds like you're identifying now that you probably had some autoimmune problems that were arising because of your first set of implants. And I'm seeing you nodding, so that is true then. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think definitely contributed hugely, if not fully, to that. Yeah.
Yeah, and your perspective is so different now, looking back and being educated by the internet. I mean, we just have so many more pieces of information and stories at our fingertips as patients now than we ever had before. So, of course, we never heard of breast implant illness before. And of course, now that is so much more accessible, and we're so grateful for that as a community. Um, Thank you, Anna, for telling your story here. I want to hear all of your handles at all of the social places because I want flatties and people who are considering going flat to know about you and see you in your beauty and your closet there on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. So share where we can find you there.
Thank you so much for having me too. Yes, you can find me if you happen to be part of the flat community or you're looking for a flat community on Facebook. You can find the flat groups there. And I'm certainly active in those groups where you can see me post there. I post more frequently now on Instagram. I try to do it daily, and that is at Closet Lady Flat Fashion and Fashions. I'm sorry. And then the same thing on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel, Closet Lady Flat Fashions, and I am kind of undergoing some transition there, but I am still posting there. But I'll get more regular again there. I'm trying to figure out how I want that to look, my channel. So yeah.
And what does your Facebook presence look like? I'm not on Facebook very much, so I don't know.
Can I name the groups there? Is that okay? Oh, okay, so there are some of the flat communities that I like to participate in. Is there's a community called Flat Out Love. There is Thrivers Who Thrift. There's Fierce Flat Forward. From some in the very beginning stages, just beginning the journey, and others, kind of early on in it, and others longer down the path, like myself, and in between. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to echo that. That Fierce Flat Forward was a super crucial place for me in the early part of my journey, just finding what a Goldilocks mastectomy could look like and how to expect that to turn out and what to ask for. So everyone goes there when they're really new to the community and new to the idea of flatness, looking for information, and it is such a wealth of information. So want to make sure and get that out there. So you're not doing Facebook lives now on your Closet Lady.
I am not doing Facebook Lives at this point. I am, yeah, working to kind of understand social media more and do more and more. But yeah, I am working towards that. And yeah, it's exciting. And yeah, I hope to be able to inspire people to just really embrace who they are and love their bodies, which is always a challenge for all of us, whether we have breasts or not. But I really want that for everybody. We all deserve to love ourselves like that for sure. Yeah.
Thank you, Anna. And does Arizona Flatties have a presence on Facebook, or where do people look for Arizona
Yeah,
Flatties?
so if you can, yeah, if you're from Arizona or anywhere in Arizona, you can easily look up Arizona Flatties and, request to become a member there. There's always a few questions when you enter these groups to, ensure privacy and to make sure that you meet the criteria to be someone that can, be in the group and safely and protect everybody's privacy as well. And then I think I'm not sure if other groups do it, but I know Flat Out Love does it. There's kind of something called like a Flatty map, and you're able to kind of put in a zip code. I think you don't have to put your full address, just a zip code, and it kind of will bring up this amazing map that kind of shows you all over the United States and even further out. I think maybe some of them now, where you can kind of locate, because we have members that are from across the world too, like where you can locate other flatties so that you can kind of connect, if you feel like it, or whenever you're ready, that there's others you can meet up with, and kind of.
Yeah, I love that. That just happened this year. I think it just blossomed all over. Like Stantal AFC has a Flatty map as well, where we can learn where the local flat groups are. So I'll talk more about that in my next episode for sure.
Thank you so much for having me, Kathleen, and thank you for what you're doing. I think it's so important. Yeah, I know how much I would have loved this when I was starting my journey, so it's so wonderful. Thank you.